she had just woken up from sleep, only to realize she was inexplicably lying in a ruined school. Before she could even make sense of the situation, Pyramid Head suddenly charged out from a nearby door. Seeing its gaze locked on her, Rose scrambled to her feet and ran forward, not daring to stop for even a second. She didn't slow down until she reached a locker room, where fear overwhelmed her and she collapsed to the floor, crying uncontrollably. But soon, swarms of cockroaches attacked again, and just as she braced herself for death, a blinding white light struck her. Immediately, a pair of hands grabbed her and dragged her into a nearby room, and Officer Sybil quickly got up and shut the door. Looking down at the writhing cockroaches on the floor, she stomped on them in anger and motioned for Rose to grab a metal pipe nearby. Trembling, Rose pried the pipe from the corner with all her strength, and together they wedged it against the door, giving themselves a short moment to catch their breath. But before they could relax, the scraping sound of metal rang out again. The monster had clearly caught up. Sybil hurriedly loaded her gun, carefully aiming at the door. Seeing that the blade couldn't reach them, Pyramid Head shoved its arm through the hole, trying to pull the pipe away. Sybil raised her gun and fired, but the bullets had no effect on the monster's arm. Realizing brute force wouldn't free the pipe, Pyramid Head turned and pulled its blade from the wall. At that critical moment, the cockroaches on the floor suddenly turned to ash and drifted away, and the hole in the door quickly sealed itself. The surroundings twisted and shifted violently. The ruined walls instantly restored, as if the terrifying encounter had been nothing more than a bizarre nightmare. Rose and Sybil cautiously stepped outside, only to find everything had returned to normal. The start of this strange ordeal wasn't the monster chasing them, it was Rose's daughter Sharon, whose sleepwalking had been happening more and more frequently. In recent days, Sharon would leave the house at night in her sleep, doing extremely dangerous things. In her dreams, she saw abandoned mines and raging flames, as well as a girl who looked exactly like her. Just as she was about to fall, dazed, Rose arrived in time and pulled her back from the edge of a cliff. But her daughter suddenly struggled violently, shouting that she wanted to go back to a place called Silent Hill. Rose had never heard of it, but determined to cure her daughter's sleepwalking, she decided to take her there to find the truth. Soon, Chris came home and discovered that his wife and daughter were gone. He frantically called Rose, but couldn't get through. He turned to his computer and searched for Silent Hill, and the information that popped up made his spine shiver. It was a ghost town, abandoned because of a constantly burning underground fire, with legends of monsters attacking anyone who entered. Meanwhile, Rose drove to a gas station, and while filling up, she looked through her daughter's picture book. The once warm and cute drawings had been twisted into something dark and terrifying, and Rose hurriedly asked Sharon why. Strangely, Sharon was terrified by the drawings, and said she hadn't done it. Sharon's frightened screams caught Sybil's attention, and while Rose was paying, she went to the car to try to talk to Sharon. Chris called again, trying to stop Rose from taking risks, insisting that Sharon should be treated in a hospital, but Rose had already made up her mind, hung up, and returned to the car. Sybil stepped forward to ask where they were headed, but Rose gave a quick reply and drove off. Seeing the car heading towards Silent Hill, Sybil immediately thought of the child abandonment case that had happened there a few days earlier and took off after it. Sirens wailed along the empty road. Rose had planned to stop and check, but didn't want to waste time. Just then, she spotted the Silent Hill sign. Seeing her daughter suffering from sleepwalking, she slammed the accelerator and drove straight into the town. But as she turned onto the road leading into the town, a girl suddenly appeared in front of the car. Rose swerved in panic and crashed violently into a roadside fence, losing consciousness. When she woke up, the car doors were wide open. Sharon was gone, and snowflakes were falling all around. Rose ignored the pain in her body and ran outside, shouting her daughter's name. The thick fog seemed to swallow everything, leaving her only able to call out in desperation. A single snowflake fell on her face, and when she touched it, she realized it was actually ash from burning wood. A nearby sign confirmed that she had reached Silent Hill, and without hesitation, Rose charged into the town. The streets were empty, covered in ash and fog, and Rose could do nothing but desperately call for her daughter. Just as she was about to lose hope, she glimpsed Sharon nearby and immediately gave chase. After going through several alleys, she followed Sharon to a narrow stairwell, when suddenly a sharp alarm rang out. The whole world plunged into darkness. The walls quickly began to crumble and decay, and Rose felt like she had stepped into another world. She lit a lighter and stepped further inside, cautiously scanning her surroundings. Sharon's figure flickered in the darkness again. Rose quickened her pace to follow, but lost sight of her around the corner. A strange pool of blood appeared on the floor, and a person was nailed to a cross above. Even more terrifying, The figure was still breathing, its gaze locked onto Rose. Immediately after that, a series of faint footsteps sounded behind her, and a small, grotesque creature had somehow appeared standing right behind her. Seeing this eerie scene, Rose screamed in terror and ran wildly in all directions, desperately trying to escape the place. Her screams only attracted more monsters, who swarmed around and grabbed her clothes. In her panic, Rose slammed open a door and ducked inside, but the monsters followed relentlessly. She crawled forward desperately to get away, but the monsters clung to her legs, refusing to let go. At the critical moment, the monsters suddenly turned to ash and dissipated into the air, and Rose fainted at the bizarre sight. When she woke up again, she was back in the fog-filled world, as if the previous ordeal had been a hallucination. She ran madly in the direction she had come from, only to find the road ahead cut in half, with a bottomless cliff below. At that moment, a woman suddenly appeared behind her, nervously claiming that she had hurt her own daughter. Rose hurried over, took out the photo from her necklace, and asked if she had seen Sharon. The woman suddenly grabbed the necklace, shouting that it was her daughter Alessa, and frantically fought over it. Frightened, Rose shoved her down and ran straight toward the parked car. Back in the car, she found a new drawing on the back seat, marked with the school, and a map of the town on the floor. Realizing something was wrong, Rose called her husband for help while starting the car, preparing to head to the school to find her daughter. At that moment, Sybil appeared, gun raised, believing that Rose had deliberately abandoned Sharon. Without hesitation, she handcuffed Rose, intending to take her back to the station for questioning. Meanwhile, Chris received Rose's call, hearing fragmented messages, and immediately headed to Silent Hill. Upon arrival, the police stopped him. The chief said Sybil had also disappeared, and Rose's car was left at the entrance. To enter Silent Hill now, he would need to be accompanied by the chief. Elsewhere, on the way back to the station, Rose and Sybil saw a swaying figure among some debris in the distance. A monster with its hands wrapped in skin staggered toward them. Sybil cautiously aimed her gun at it, but the next moment, the wrapped man suddenly sprayed black liquid from its chest. The liquid hit the helmet, producing thick black smoke, and Sybil angrily fired her gun at the monster. Taking the chance, Rose ran out, following the roadside signs all the way to the abandoned school. Inside the school, she called out for Sharon, while searching for clues around her. Fortunately, she found a set of keys and a flashlight in a drawer at the administration office. Soon, Rose heard footsteps in the hallway, and quickly shone her flashlight ahead to check. But at the corner appeared several strange figures in protective suits carrying bird cages. Rose quickly shielded the flashlight and ran past. By accident, she stumbled into an abandoned classroom, covered in ash, with only a clean set of handprints on a desk. Beneath was engraved the letters of a witch. Lifting the desk panel, Rose discovered the owner was the crazy woman's daughter, Alessa. At that moment, Sharon's figure flashed by the doorway again, and Rose chased after her without thinking. Following her footsteps, she arrived at an abandoned bathroom on the second floor. Sad crying came from one of the stalls. Rose crouched down to look and saw a pair of feet lift up. She mustered her courage and checked each stall one by one, but found nothing, until she opened the last stall door, where a figure was tightly bound in the confined space. Wire wrapped around his body, binding his limbs and torso, with only a nameplate showing his name, Colin. A huge arrow on the wall pointed to the janitor's mouth, clearly indicating the clue was hidden there. Although the scene made Rose feel extremely nauseous, she forced herself to reach into its mouth and pulled out a strange shard. Just as Rose was about to leave, the mysterious figures in protective suits had already arrived. Rose hurriedly locked the door with her keys, while the strangers outside pounded on it furiously. But at the sound of a bird chirping, they suddenly froze, then panicked and ran off carrying the bird cages. As Rose was puzzled by this, a familiar alarm blared again, plunging the world back into darkness. The wallpaper peeled off rapidly, and everything around her, the walls, the objects, decayed before her eyes. Then a strange sound came from a stall, and the janitor, bound by wires, suddenly came to life. It roared and crawled toward Rose, and wherever it touched, countless vein-like tendrils spread instantly. Countless cockroaches erupted from the tendrils. Terrified, Rose ran out of the bathroom down the stairs, only to witness the strangers being devoured by the cockroaches. The sight made her hair stand on end, and she rushed to the door, desperate to escape. But all the exits were blocked, and below her was a burning abandoned mine. The girl who looked just like Sharon appeared again, leaning over a table, scribbling wildly. She suddenly looked up, her gaze icy, staring at Rose, who slipped and fell in fright. Elsewhere, Chris entered Silent Hill under the chief's guidance. From the chief, he learned that years ago, a massive fire swept through the town, leaving only a few survivors. Because of the abundant underground coal mines, the fire continued to burn, and the town gradually became a deserted ghost town. They searched every corner but found no trace of Rose or Sharon. Meanwhile, Rose, waking from her faint, encountered the pursuing Pyramid Head and ran frantically through the school to evade it. Chris also arrived at the school, catching the scent of Rose's perfume in the air. Convinced she was nearby, following the scent, he rushed into the locker room, calling out Rose's name desperately, but got no response. Though the time and place were the same, they were in completely different spaces. From the moment Rose entered Silent Hill, she had fallen into the fog world, filled with ash and dense fog. When the alarm sounded, in an instant she was pulled into the decayed, monster-filled Otherworld. The difference in their spaces meant Chris's efforts were in vain. He tried asking the chief about the fire, seeking more clues, but the chief refused, citing case confidentiality, and even the archives held no answers from back then. Thinking of his long-missing wife and daughter, Chris sneaked into the archives under the cover of night. In a tattered archive room, he found the answer. 30 years ago, a girl who looked exactly like Sharon survived the fire. To find the truth, he rushed to the orphanage where Sharon had been adopted and questioned the director. But when the director saw the girl's photo, her face turned pale, and she hurriedly tried to leave. Sensing something was wrong, Chris grabbed her, but the chief suddenly arrived and handcuffed him. The chief only told him that the girl had suffered serious injuries in the fire, withholding all other details, and told him to go home and wait for news. Elsewhere, with Cybel's help, Rose endured the fating of the Otherworld and returned to the fog world. Following the nameplate found in the janitor's mouth, they located the town's largest hotel. As soon as they arrived, they heard a cry for help and rushed inside. A woman was throwing stones at the crazy woman. Rose hurried over to stop her and managed to save the crazy woman. Sybil asked the woman for details, learning that her name was Anna, and the crazy woman was Dahlia. Dahlia, Alessa's mother, had been despised by everyone, and even the dark forces refused to accept her. Anna then got up to gather the scattered food, and the two began searching for Sharon's clues. Soon, Cybel found a drawing of Sharon in a locker. Using the number on it, they began searching for room 101 in the hotel. But the hotel only had rooms 110 and 112. Room 111 was nowhere to be found. Then Rose noticed a painting on the wall, which closely resembled the illustrations in Sharon's picture book. She immediately stepped forward, slashing the painting with a knife, and behind it discovered room 111. The three rushed into the room, finding it scorched by fire, and the girl who looked just like Sharon appeared once again. Rose realized she might actually be Alessa and hurriedly asked about Sharon's whereabouts. Alessa said nothing, turned, and vanished into thin air, while Sybil and Anna caught up at that moment. Just as Rose was still caught up in the previous scene, a massive flock of crows flew out from the mine, and the air raid siren blared. Anna shouted that the dark forces were coming, and she ran like crazy toward the church with them. When they reached the church, Rose saw the same cross that was in her daughter's drawing, clearly connected to Sharon's disappearance. As the alarm grew louder, a crowd of worshippers rushed into the church, but Dahlia suddenly appeared and blocked them. She screamed madly that these people were cursed, and entering the church would only lead to their doom. Anna angrily shouted that she was lying, and threw a stone at Dahlia. Rose stepped forward to calm things down, saying she had seen Alessa and asked Dahlia what her intentions were. But Dahlia merely warned her to choose carefully, and then darkness completely engulfed them. The ground decayed rapidly. Rose and Cybel hurriedly turned and ran toward the church, while Dahlia stood up and pointed at Anna. Fortunately, Rose and the others made it into the church at the last moment. The worshippers, seeing outsiders, angrily accused them of being witches and tried to drive them out. In the chaos, Sybil fired one last shot into the air, which calmed the crowd, and the priestess Christabella arrived. She asked them why they were here. Rose said she only wanted to find her daughter, and meant no harm. But Christabella said only a demon could find Sharon. If Rose was willing to face the demon, she could take her there. Rose's maternal conviction left her with no hesitation. She agreed, and before leaving, Christabella picked up Rose's dropped necklace. Upon reaching an abandoned hospital, she showed Rose the room where the demon was, and had her memorize the route map. Just as Rose was about to set off, Christabella took out Rose's necklace to return it and happened to see Sharon's photo. Her gentle demeanor suddenly changed. Seeing that Sharon looked like Alessa, she assumed Rose was also a demon and intended to take them both. Sensing danger, Cybel quickly shielded Rose, telling her to go ahead while she bought time. Rose was successfully sent down into the well, but Cybel, left behind, was captured by the worshippers. Using the route map given by Christabella, Rose successfully navigated through multiple tunnels. But just as she was about to reach the ward, a group of sleeping nurses blocked the middle of the corridor. Before Rose could react, the bright light from her flashlight instantly awakened them. With a sudden convulsion, they twisted their bodies and approached Rose, dragging their weapons. Fortunately, Rose quickly turned off the flashlight, and the nurses returned to their original state, standing still. Clearly, they relied on light to sense prey, and without it, they couldn't determine direction. Rose then held her breath and carefully crept closer, trying to slip through the gap between them. After passing the nurses, Rose left the flashlight behind as a distraction, then quickly ran toward the ward. With a flash of white light, she finally learned the whole truth from Alessa herself. Decades ago, the townspeople were strongly against witches, believing they would bring disaster to the town. Alessa, having no father, was labeled a witch and condemned by everyone. To avoid harm, she hid in a bathroom on the second floor, where she encountered the twisted janitor Colin. When Dahlia arrived, Christabella said that only a cleansing ritual for Alessa could stop it all. Under Christabella's authority, Dahlia believed her and sent Alessa for the ritual. Ultimately, they performed the ritual in room 1111 of the hotel. During the ritual, a fire basin was accidentally tipped over. Flames engulfed everything around it and ignited the underground coal mine, burning the town instantly. Although Dahlia arrived in time to try to save her daughter, everyone else fled, ignoring her. In the end, the chief arrived and rescued Alessa, taking her to the hospital for treatment. This experience gradually filled Alessa, who had always lived in pain, with hatred, and this power began to alter everything around her. Her dark side was born, taking the form of Alessa in purple clothes, dragging everyone in the town into a nightmare. The ignorant and blind following worshippers were pulled into the fog world, filled with endless white mist. Those who had harmed her were twisted one by one into monsters to endure her own form of justice. Alessa's last bit of kindness took the form of Sharon, whom she left at the orphanage doorstep to be adopted by the Roses. The collective belief of the worshippers created a barrier around the church, keeping those seeking revenge outside. By choosing Sharon, Rose also chose them, and Christabella clearly would not let Sharon, who resembled them, go. To save her daughter, Rose immediately asked how she could help them. Alessa said she only needed the truth to be spoken, then opened her arms, embraced Rose, and merged into her as dark threads. Elsewhere, Christabella and her followers broke into Dahlia's room. Seeing the resemblance, she believed Sharon was her own daughter. She desperately blocked Sharon, but could not hold off the many worshippers, and was dragged into the church along with her. Seeing the worshippers below preparing for the ritual, Cybele angrily denounced their actions and tried to stop them from harming Sharon. Yet Christabella believed Cybele was aiding and abetting the evil, insisting the ritual begin with Cybele. Immediately she lit the torch in her hand, and facing this horrific scene, the worshippers actually let out terrifying cheers. Christabella then resumed Sharon's trial, and just as she was grandstanding on the stage, Rose arrived in time. Seeing Cybele's mangled body, she angrily condemned Christabella's actions and exposed the truth from years ago. Christabella used everyone's fear to kill the innocent and fulfill her own desires. No matter what Rose said, the worshippers refused to believe her, and Christabella angrily lunged at her. Christabella then threw down a dagger, claiming Rose was a blasphemer and that she was only helping her purify. Blood from the dagger dripped onto the floor, quickly spreading, and darkness completely enveloped the church. The center of the church decayed and collapsed into an abandoned mine, and the entire stack of wood crashed down. Amid the fearful and confused gazes, Alessa's true form slowly rose from the mine. Countless wires shot out from Alessa, wrapping around Christabella's hands and hoisting her into the air, beginning her rightful revenge. At the same time, Alessa's dark side climbed out of the mine and danced joyfully in the center of the church. The worshippers who had harmed her were wrapped in wires, receiving their deserved punishment. Alessa, however, ignored Dahlia standing nearby, giving her only a cold glance. Facing this terrifying scene, Rose held the trembling Sharon tightly. Alessa then climbed the stairs, and Rose's selfless love for Sharon was exactly the affection she had longed for. She leaned in and stared at Sharon intently, and Sharon immediately fainted from fright. Once it was all over, they returned to the fog-filled world. Rose held Sharon's hand as they walked toward the exit, while Dahlia, the sole survivor, sat on the ground looking dejected.
Why did she not take me with the others?
Because you're her mother. Mother is God in the eyes of a child.
As they left, Sharon gave her only a cold glance before turning and leaving with Rose. Soon, the mother and daughter returned to the car. Sharon happily opened the door, as if everything they had gone through was just a dream. Rose happily called her husband, saying it was all over and that they were on their way home. But when Chris answered the phone, all he heard was static, and he lay back on the couch in disappointment. When Rose returned home, she found Chris was not there, and thick white fog still filled the surroundings. It was clear that Sharon had already merged with Alessa. Unwilling to let go of this easily obtained maternal love, Rose sat on the couch quietly looking at the opposite sofa, where Chris seemed to sense Rose's presence again. He hurriedly got up and ran out, but at the doorway, there was still no sign of his wife and daughter, only the wide-open door. Rose and Sharon could not leave Silent Hill, trapped in that eternal white fog. When the truth is called again, the forgotten town will still be waiting for its next visitor.